Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. The Sensex and the Nifty decline for the third straight session. Mid-caps fare relatively better. The Nifty Bank Index hits a record high in early trade before declining in the last hour. The government cautions on a potential cut to petrol and diesel prices. Sources cite geopolitical uncertainty and US statements on Russian oil imports, saying there is much to unpack before taking a decision on a price cut. India currently sources 35% of its oil demand from Russia. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says that he expects a deal with India in the not-too-distant future, says it will lead to a special relationship between both nations. Adds that both countries will have to arrive at a middle ground between Washington looking at lower trade deficit and Delhi eyeing special access in certain US sectors. Aditya Birla says the Aditya Birla Group is the largest Indian investor in the US with a footprint worth $15 billion across sectors. Calls their $4 billion investment in Alabama the conglomerate's largest greenfield project. That's an exclusive. Vodafone Idea is unlikely to get any relief on AGR dues, even as the management says the government has the flexibility to intervene. Telecom Minister Scindia says he does not see the government increasing its stake from the current 49% in the near future. India inquires to the Finance Ministry seeking key changes to the GST structure to expand the tax base and remove cascading taxes. Calls for bringing petroleum products, electricity and real estate under the GST ambit. That's an exclusive. Death toll rises to 36 as floods ravage parts of northeast India. More than 5 lakh people affected by the deluge and landslides across several states. Israeli forces opened fire at Palestinians awaiting food distribution in Gaza, killing at least 27 people. The UN Secretary General calls for an independent probe into the mass shooting of aid seekers in Gaza. At least 3 people are dead and several injured after Russian airstrikes on Ukraine. Sumy, no breakthrough yet in the Istanbul peace talks as Russia demands more territory and seeks to limit the size of the Ukrainian army. Let's go straight to the day's market action. The Sensex and the Nifty declining for the third day. 45 out of the 50 Nifty stocks closed in the red today. The Nifty Bank, by the way, hit a record high in early trade, but then we saw some profit booking in the late trade as well there too. Nifty down by about 175 points, 636 points lower. The Sensex, the Nifty Bank giving up its gains, finally closing 300 points lower after hitting a record high. And the mid-caps also down in the red today, down by about 250 odd points. But last year, on this very day, the market surged after exit polls over the weekend forecast a landslide victory for the incumbent Narendra Modi-led government. However, a day later, while the Lok Sabha elections, the votes were being counted, the Lal Street saw a meltdown as it became clearer that the BJP-led NDA would retain power, but with a much weaker than expected mandate. And it has been a roller coaster ride for the stock market since then. Hormuz decodes the market's trajectory over the last 365 days. Domestic cues, but then plenty of global action as well. Hormuz, the year that was under Modi 3.0.
You know, on the same day last year, Dalal Street witnessed one of the 2 most manic days of 2024. Now, exit polls were predicting a thumping majority for the incumbent Narendra Modi government for the 3rd straight term. Now, in response, here's a look at the way the markets rallied on the 3rd of June last year. The Nifty Bank, the broader markets, all of them. But the actual gains came from the PSU stocks, the stars of 2023, carrying on their shine into 2024 as well. Alas, the next day, when the actual results were out, the BJP fell short of that magic 272 number, and the markets did not like that. The market lost double of what it had gained on the 3rd of June. And if the PSU stocks led the up move, they also bore the biggest brunt of the exit polls going wrong. PSUs were the biggest contributors to the 31 lakh crore rupees of investor wealth that was wiped out on the 4th of June. However, when the markets realized that the NDA will remain in power and Narendra Modi will become Prime Minister for a historic 3rd term, the recovery began. The Nifty went on to make a new high 3 months later, as did the broader markets during the course of the year. And despite the sharp sell-off witnessed from then until March of this year, most of these indices have had double-digit gains during the last 365 days. The underperformers, PSUs. And this 4.5% surge that you see is also courtesy of the recent up move that you have seen in these railways and the defense names that has propelled the index back into the positive territory. So who's been the biggest gainer on the Nifty during the last 1 year? The index heavyweights? Not really. Mostly new entrants like BEL, Shriram Finance, Eternal. They are the ones that form the list, completed by legacy names like HDFC Life and Bharti Airtel. The names on the downside, though, should not surprise surprise you other than Tata Motors, the only Nifty stock that had doubled in value in 2023 is down 20% during this period. And this is after recovering from its 52-week lows. Now, IndusInd Bank and others like Adani Enterprises complete the list. Now, let's take a look at the broader market gainers. Paytm shares are still down 56% from their IPO price. But if you were a buyer in the stock on the 4th of June last year, you would have made a cool 2.5x on your investment already. The recent rally in shares of BSC, Masgaon Dock and Solar Industries also puts them into this club. Now, on the flip side, Vodafone Idea leads the list of losers, followed by Ola Electric, which listed in July of last year. Hindustan Zinc and Astral are some of the other underperformers, down between 25 to 30%. Now, if Masgaon Dock was part of the mid-cap winners, Garden Reach is part of the small-cap winners, also having doubled from June of last year. And this is despite a 60% correction from the top and a subsequent recovery after that. PG Electroplast and Zen Technologies are also part of this list, having doubled and even tripled in value during the last 365 days. Losers here are also not from a specific sector. Birlasoft, which has been under pressure recently after a downgrade, Titagarh Rail, Tejas Networks have all faced some of the other headwinds during the last 12 months, and it shows up in the price. PSU stocks, known for their triple-digit returns in recent times, have barely managed to cross double digits during the last year. Barring BEL, most of the other names in the list have only gained between 10 to 20%, and this I'm talking about the PSE index and their constituents. Even on the losers, the once high-flying names like IRFC and REC are continuing to grind lower, having corrected between 40 to 50% from their highs. So it's been a year to Modi 3.0, and while the markets have delivered decent returns despite multiple global headwinds like tariffs, the PSUs would want to now raise their hand and play catch-up and bring back the days of 2023 when they were simply unstoppable.
All right. Many thanks, Hormuz. That's year one of Modi 3.0 for the stock markets. Now, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has cut growth forecasts for the U.S. The OECD has forecast that the U.S. economy will grow only 1.6% this year and 1.5% next year. In March, that is, the organization said it expected a 2.2% expansion in 2025. The OECD has cited the fallout from U.S. President Trump's tariff policy and elevated economic policy uncertainty as the reasons for the latest downgrade. The OECD has also lowered its forecast for global growth in 2025 to 2.9%. Now, China's manufacturing output contracted in the month of May. This was largely triggered by a sharp decline in exports amidst that trade tussle between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. The S&P Global Manufacturing PMI came in at a reading of 48.3. Any reading below 50 indicates contraction. This is the slowest pace of growth for the Chinese manufacturing sector since September of 2022. Now, gold prices eased from 4-week highs as the dollar index moved higher. Crude oil prices are also inching higher due to supply concerns from Iran, Russia and Canada. Negotiations between the US and Iran over a nuclear deal have stalled. Wildfires raging in Canada could also impact oil supply, and all of this is weighing on prices. But back home, the Indian government is cautious about a potential cut to petrol and diesel prices. Government sources cite geopolitical uncertainty and the US statements on Russian oil imports, saying there is much to unpack before taking a decision. Sapna is here with the details. So, Sapna, should we hope for a price cut in petrol and diesel prices?
Well, we are given to understand that due to geopolitical factors, a lot of uncertainty on the geopolitical front, and this is weighing on the decision to basically reduce petrol and diesel prices, both at the OMC's end and at the government's end. Primarily, if you look at statements coming from the US in terms of imposition of tariffs as high as 500% against those nations which import crude oil from Russia, then that geopolitical uncertainty is even heightened further. So what we are given to understand is that probably stakeholders are still waiting and watching. Everyone is in a wait and watch mode. Basically also to understand what is the finality in terms of the US policy towards sourcing of crude oil from Russia. Apart from that, if you look at the currency movement also, despite the dollar weakening, the INR also had weakened to an extent. So that is also a factor which OMCs are keeping in mind. Other than this, we are also given to understand that, however, if US still goes ahead with these additional tariffs against importing nations of crude oil from Russia, then India will still be better placed because there is plenty of crude oil available in the world. If you look at the OPEC production hikes, around 1.2 million barrels per day. So there is no dearth of crude oil as such, and maybe the Indian companies will have to rework their contracts or look for diversify their sourcing of crude oil. except that, that oil may not be as cheap as what we have been sourcing so far. The discounts may actually either vanish or they may come down to a great extent. But all said and done, it's a wait-and-watch mode as far as the retail fuel prices are concerned. No doubt the Indian basket has also kind of softened over the last 1 month or so. However, given the geopolitical developments and factors, it's difficult to take a call as of now in terms of an immediate price cut on petrol and diesel.
All right, so perhaps a fuel price cut not imminent at this point in time. Remember, there is that threat of the 500% tariff that the US is planning to impose on countries like India and China if we continue to import Russian crude. And that's where we take the story. The US Congress is likely to consider legislation imposing 500% tariffs on countries buying oil from Russia. US Congressman Rich McCormick, who's also the co-chair of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, told Parikshit Luthra he supports the legislation. McCormick said Russian oil is funding the war in Ukraine. Take a look.
I would also like to ask you about the bill that certain congressmen and certain senators are looking to bring, and this is about imposing 500% tariffs on countries which import Russian oil. Now, India could be impacted, China could be impacted as well. Would you also support such a bill, and do you consider this as a need of the hour?
So, when we're in war, absolutely. And I've said this before, I've been very open about this. The one criticism I have of India is they're literally funding the war against Ukraine. This war, which is killing thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, probably over 1 million people, is being funded by oil money. Who's buying the propensity oil? India. I love Prime Minister Modi. I love what he's trying to do for his economy. I get it. I know it's a hardship. But this war would be over in less than a year had it not been funded by the oil bought by India, and it's sold back to Europe in large part. So I don't just blame India. It shouldn't be just India punished, by the way. It should be the European countries buying it back from India that didn't produce it at the beginning. European countries are hypocrites when they buy Russian-produced oil. The United States should be opening up its oil industry to make it just as cheap as Russia does. Maybe not just as cheap, but close.
Well, the US looking at moving legislation to impose a 500% tariff on countries that continue to import Russian crude. Now, the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum has kicked off the 8th edition of its leadership summit in Washington, D.C. overnight. Speaking at a fireside chat at the summit, US Second Lady Usha Vance described the relationship between India and the US as deeply personal, also reflected on the immense potential in strengthening bilateral partnership between the two countries. Speaking at the same summit, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said he expects a deal with India in the not-too-distant future, adding it will lead to a special relationship between both nations. Take a look.
I think the United States wants to bring advanced manufacturing back to the United States of America. All right, that's a key industrial platform for us to bring back domestic manufacturing and reshoring in America. Right? So now there are enormous number of product categories that we are going to be delighted for India to produce. And what we're going to have is you'll sort of have a trade deal that says, look, these kind of industries would be great for India to produce. And in fact, there are enormous numbers of industries that we'd really like to go to India, right? And what happens is you create this sort of trade deal that puts India in a unique position, right? Because it'll have a special relationship with the United States. In certain industries, it will have a better tariff relationship than most other countries in the world, which means India will be the beneficiary of those kind of products.
The United States and India, their relationship has ebbed and flowed at times. There are times when one country's needs and one country's goals are different from the other. But right now, I think in the next 4 years and in the future, the fact that there is this established Indian American population here and so many people in India who know the country and know the people who are here doing great things, having great opportunities. When we were visiting recently, I was struck by the number of people who came up to me to say how much they loved our country, how they visited family, how they visited just for pleasure, that they were hoping for a close relationship looking forward.
Well, they call me a rose glass colored optimist, and the glass is usually not just half full, but 3/4 full. I do think that there's a lot of momentum toward getting a trade bill done, a bilateral trade bill between India and the United States. I think it will be a magnificent event and great for both countries and their GDP and their economic growth. As you know, this is an issue we ambassadors struggle with all the time, is the economic issues, trade, getting into new markets and creating new opportunities for our people, our middle class, and our workers. So I'm optimistic, but nothing's ever done between the United States and India until it's way over the finish line.
Now, to President Trump, I think 10% is what he wants to have, and if Prime Minister Modi has a 10% reciprocal, that's fair, as long as everybody has to say. Both governments wet their beak, if you will. I'm not a big government guy. I'd rather see no taxes and free trade. But as long as it's equitable, I think we can expect that. I think India has already shown they want to work well with us, that they're friendly with us. They see a huge market in us. And I think we see a huge market in India, as well as the biggest expanding market in the world, especially on digital economy. It's important to include India, and I think the less regulation and taxation we have on that, to include tariffs, the better off both countries are going to be for each other.
And more on the India-US partnership. Kumar Mangalam Birla said that the Aditya Birla Group is the largest Indian investor in the US with a footprint worth $15 billion across sectors. Birla has also called their $4 billion investment in Alabama the conglomerate's largest greenfield project. Take a look.
We've been investors in the US for about 15 years, if not a little more. Invested about $15 billion already, and we are by far the largest Indian investor in the US. We've had a terrific experience, and like I was saying earlier, we intend to invest more going forward. There is a greenfield site that we are investing in Alabama by the name of Bay Minette. That's the name of the place. It's a $4 billion greenfield investment, and in fact, that is the largest greenfield investment we've made anywhere in the world. Which just demonstrates our confidence and comfort of doing business in the US.
That's Kumar Mangalam Birla on the group's expansion plans in the US. Vodafone Idea is unlikely to get any relief on AGR dues this evening, as the management during an earnings call said that they see no reason why the government should be constrained to offer relief if the government so decides. Ashmit joins us now to take us through where things currently stand. Ashmit, as far as the AGR waiver or relief is concerned, is there any room, any flexibility for the government to act?
Well, the latest that has fallen from the Telecom Minister, Aditya Birla, is that the Supreme Court judgment is clear that that's the final word as far as the AGR waiver issue is concerned, and that there's nothing further lying on his table at this moment, at least as far as the AGR issue is concerned. And now, bear in mind, this is consistent with what we have been reporting. CNBC TV18 was the first to report that Vodafone Idea had written to the DOT seeking a waiver of these AGR dues, especially the interest and the penalty components. However, on that front, at the time, the DOT had responded to the Vodafone Idea letter, whereby it had clarified that, look, the Supreme Court judgment, the AGR judgment as we now call it, has our hands tied. There is no room for consideration. Subsequently, we had this issue moved before the Supreme Court. There again, through the Solicitor General, the centre made its position clear that as of right now, given how the Supreme Court has spelled out the matter very clearly, there is no room for consideration for grant of further relief, at least on the AGR front. And subsequently, the Supreme Court had expressed shock at having had this fresh application being filed by Vodafone Idea, saying that this petition is entirely misconceived, and thereby the Apex Court had proceeded to reject the petition altogether. So clearly, the Supreme Court spelling it out clearly, and after that, now the Telecom Ministry, now the Telecom Minister making the stance clear that going forward, at least on the AGR issue, there is no room to maneuver with respect to grant of relief. Back to you.
Ashwin, many thanks. Now, shares of Ola Electric down over 7% in trade after a large block deal took place in today's session. More than 14 crore shares, amounting to 3.2% equity, exchanged hands on the bourses. The transaction worth 731 crore rupees. Sources have told CNBC TV18 that Hyundai Motors is the likely seller in this transaction, so Ola under pressure. And staying with block deals, shares of Yes Bank down more than 8% in early trade after 3% of the bank's equity changed hands. The transaction was worth over 2,000 crore rupees at an average price of 21.5 rupees a share. Sources tell us that a private equity firm is the likely seller. Now, the Madras High Court has upheld the Tamil Nadu government's new regulations on real money gaming platforms, which impose time and usage restrictions. The court dismissed petitions from major companies like Games 24/7, Jungly Games and Winzo. The court ruled that the state's restrictions aim to protect users' mental and physical health. Remember, the rules include a ban on gameplay between midnight and 5 a.m. as well as Aadhaar verification. A surprise inspection is underway at Sun Pharma's Halol facility in Gujarat. Sources tell CNBC TV18 that 3 US FDA inspectors are currently inspecting the unit. The facility was last inspected in May 2022 and is currently under an import alert following a warning letter from the US FDA. We'll take a short break, but up next, India Inc. writes to the Finance Ministry seeking key changes to the GST structure to expand the tax base and remove cascading taxes. That and more when we get back. Well, on to a CNBC TV18 exclusive. India Inc. has written to the Finance Ministry seeking key changes to the GST structure. Timsy standing by with more. Timsy, what is on industry's wish list?
Well, that's right. What we are given to understand from sources is the fact that the industry has written to Finance Ministry seeking some key changes in the GST structure to expand the tax base. Industry's push for GST tweaks is that the GST Council should urgently look to bringing in petroleum products, electricity and real estate under the GST net. And they say that by bringing petroleum products, real estate and electricity under the GST will help grow tax net, remove cascading taxes, and only then the government will get the right elbow room to cut GST rates, which will actually be beneficial for the common man and also for the industry, because they will be able to remove these cascading impacts, and yes, overall for the government as well to enhance revenue generation. Apart from this, they said that when it comes to petroleum products, government can consider bringing in petroleum products under GST in a phased manner, starting with ATF and natural gas. Also, they said that the government can start bringing in real estate under GST by removing ITC curbs on inward supplies in construction. On electricity side, they said since this is a necessary input in all business activities, exclusion from GST causes cascading taxes, and thus government should now be on alert to bring these key areas under the GST net. Just to remind our viewers, when it comes to real estate, a part of it is already there under the GST. The real estate, for example, rentals, leases, works contract services, etc. are taxed under GST. So real estate partially is under GST, but ITC curbs on inward supply of goods and services used for construction is still excluded, and that's what the industry wants. Let's see whether the GST Council in the upcoming meet is actually ready to take up these key proposals or not, something that we'll have to wait and watch for.
Timsy, many thanks. The big global story, Microsoft has laid off 305 employees in another round of job cuts. This comes weeks after reducing nearly 3% of its global workforce. According to Bloomberg, the company confirmed that these layoffs are separate from the earlier round. Microsoft said in a statement that it is implementing organizational changes needed to best position the company for success. Elon Musk's XAI has reportedly launched a $300 million share sale that values the group at $113 billion. The deal will allow staff to sell shares to new investors. The secondary stock offering is expected to be followed by a larger investment round in which the company will offer new equity to outside investors. According to a Bloomberg report, the AI firm also launched a $5 billion debt sale, which includes a term loan B and a fixed-rate term loan. Tech giant Samsung is close to inking a deal with Perplexity to integrate its AI search technology into its flagship smartphone. This move could displace Google's Gemini as the default AI assistant on the Samsung Galaxy S26 series. Samsung is also expected to be one of the biggest investors in Perplexity's new funding round. The AI firm plans to raise $500 billion at a valuation of $14 billion. User development fee, a charge levied on air passengers by airports to fund infrastructure development, has become a major bone of contention in the aviation sector. Air India CEO Campbell Wilson says the recent hike in the fee could impact people's choice on whether or not to fly. Meanwhile, Adani Airports, the nation's top airport developer, says that a hike in user development fee is justified and is key to providing better amenities to flyers. Take a look.
Anything that adds cost to travel clearly at the margin means that there might be less of it. But This is a regulated process. We are consulted during the regulation of user charges. We might not like the outcome of those, but...
is it too high, you think?
You ask an airline, of course it's too high. Of course it's every cost that we incur is too high.
We want to drive UDF to bare minimum, say, next 10 years' time. The UDF should be bare minimum to the extent that it's almost free. And since we have a dwell-till method where non-aero subsidized, I want to provide so much of convenience for people that they use airport as shopping destination, as a transit point. It happens to, they happen to fly from there.
And it's not just Air India. Indigo, which is, of course, the largest airline, has also said that the high user development fee is going to be a problem. Now, the death toll has risen to 36 in floods ravaged parts of northeast India. More than 5 lakh people have been affected by the deluge and landslides across several states. Assam reported the highest number of fatalities at 11, with 6 people losing their lives due to the floods and 5 others due to landslides. In international news, at least 27 Palestinians have been killed and dozens injured after Israeli forces opened fire at a food distribution center in Gaza. The aid distribution site, called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is backed by the US and Israel. The UN Secretary General has called for an independent investigation into the mass shooting of aid seekers that have been reported every day since the 27th of May. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has said that 3 of its soldiers have been killed in northern Gaza. The Delhi police has identified a Belgium embassy employee who allegedly put up posters that said Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu is wanted. No case has been registered as he enjoys diplomatic immunity. However, the Ministry of External Affairs has said it will take up the issue with the Belgian government. The posters were spotted by the police in Delhi's Chanakyapuri area about 10 to 12 days ago. At least 3 people are dead, several injured after Russian airstrikes on Ukraine's Sumy. Ukrainian President Zelensky has condemned the attack, calling it a savage assault that deliberately targeted civilians. The second round of peace talks between the two nations ended without a major breakthrough. This after Ukraine rejected Russia's terms, which included Kyiv foregoing more territory and accepting limits on the size of its army. Well, with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. The news will continue right here on CNBC TV18. Do stay tuned. We're back in a moment with more.